Good evening and welcome back to Overtime here on WOTM. I'm Gerhard Mathangani with you for the next hour. And as always on Wednesdays, it's become kind of a tradition here on Overtime. We bring our friend in, Mark Everett Kelly. Mark obviously is a former researcher with ESPN and a lot of other production elements, and he brings a lot to the show as far as the numbers. It helps the numbers and whatnot tell the story of what you're seeing in the games. And we'll do that a lot with the Super Bowl. We'll do that with National Signing Day. Auburn basketball playing last night, lots of other topics, and we'll get into it. Mark, how you doing tonight?
All right. Thanks for having me back.
No problem. All right, first I'll start with National Signing Day. Of course, the momentum started in December, and Signing Day is different now because you have the early period first, and then you have what's typical, the national typical signing day coming up in February. Now, most of the classes are already set, but there's also a few national surprises. Alabama continued the momentum from last year, brought it into this year, brought a couple of guys in, signed only 2 players today, adding to the 25 that they have on for the 2021 class. First of all, what do you make of the 2 guys that they did sign today with Kamar Wheaton, the running back out of Garland, Texas, and Terrion Arnold out of Tallahassee, Florida?
Well, I mean, it looks like they'll have a pretty deep backfield because you still have the recruits that they had last year that made up the running backs for Alabama. So they were rock solid heading into today. These guys just solidified their position as the best class. Some have them rated the best class ever in recruiting history.
And we'll jump into that.
So, I mean, that just alone makes this even better for them. And when you look at the type of athletes that they get overall, these guys coming into Alabama, the one thing that stands out differently with Alabama from other schools is their ability that they have athletes at every position.
That's right.
And these guys are multidimensional. They can run fast, they can jump, they can do a number of different things. So even when they come into Alabama, they might have a specific role that could change very quickly when they get there once their talents are kind of understood and then used.
No doubt. And you mentioned the 25 that they have on earlier. That makes for 27 players overall in the 2021 class. And we'll take a look at some of the guys that they signed. This is, as you mentioned, some of the top players at their position. Several players that are number 1 at their position, including offensive tackle J.C. Latham out of Florida, the number 1 cornerback Kool-Aid McKinstry just down the road at Pinson Valley, the number 1 center James Brockermeyer, the number 2 offensive tackle, and number 1 according to ESPN, his twin brother Tommy Brockermeyer. Then also the number 2 offensive guard Terry Ferguson, the number 2 wide receiver in the country, and Ja'Cory Brooks at Florida. Also the number 3 inside linebacker Deontay Lawson down south over in Mobile. The number 3 offense, the outside linebacker Dallas Turner out of Florida. Dameron Payne, the number 3 defensive tackle out of Michigan. And wide receiver A.G. Hall out of Florida, the number 3 wide receiver. And the weak side defensive end Keanu Holt. So a lot of players that are ranked 1, 2, or 3 in their respective positions shows a lot about what Nick Saban's able to do from a recruiting standpoint, because this year, unlike any other, you couldn't have official visits for the most part. When coronavirus, the pandemic shut down all of travel across the country. So you had to basically do Zoom calls and whatnot in order to get these classes in. What was your take overall about Alabama's class and some of these top players at the respective positions?
You look at the offensive line. Alabama always has offensive. That's the reason why their offense is always the quarterbacks have all the time to pass. The running backs get these wide open lanes, which makes it for them to rank in the top 5 in offense every year. But that's because they get these recruits, the Brockermeyer brothers from Texas. Those guys look like they just can't wait to get out there and block somebody on offense. But you see guys like Leatherwood in this past year's class, they always have great offensive linemen, and it's because they recruit really well in that area. And then even as the outside linebacker, probably the biggest jump in college football is the ability to get to the quarterback, consistently get to the quarterback. Alabama consistently has good athletes on the outside that can play, line up and get the quarterback, and also line up and now be able to guard receivers too. You saw that Alabama being able to take advantage of that a number of times during the regular season with the number of athletes they line up on offense. How do you match up with a Najee Harris? How do you match up on the inside with Mechie or Waddle? Linebackers got to be able to do that. So you even look at Deontay Lawson, Dallas Turner. Those are guys that can be guys that can get after the quarterback, but they can also guys that can cover. And you can't just be a one-sided linebacker. Now you have to be able to do a number of different things, and also maybe even be able to play safety. There are a lot of different things they expect from these guys now. So the ability for them to do that and be athletes like they are, it just adds to their advantage even more in the guys that they recruit.
Yeah, no doubt. The rich certainly get richer here. Let's take a look at Alabama's class by state. I think this is probably one of the more impressive things. Alabama signed players from 11 different states. What is crazy about that is the fact that, like we talked about earlier, there was no traveling. A lot of these players didn't visit Tuscaloosa. Some already had. Maybe some went to camps. We don't know for sure who was able to get on and not get on. We know that their coaches could not have contact with players, so even if they had a soft visit, they came in with their families or their high school coaches. They weren't able to kind of see the whole facility as you would in a normal year.
Right.
What is this class as far as where they were able to get the talent from Alabama all the way to Wisconsin and everywhere else in order to make this happen?
It just shows that if you're Alabama and you have the type of system Alabama has, you have, first of all, if you see Coach Saban on a Zoom call, you probably get a faint. Okay,
Right.
Just to be able to spend time with him, get to pick his brain. That's a real treat for some of these athletes. It's just what he brings to the table that other coaches don't. It's, it is what it is.
Right.
The other thing is Alabama's, when you look online at some of the facilities they have, they are second class, second to none.
Right.
Or excuse me, first class,
Right.
second to none. I combined the two there. First class, second to none. These things, like even that they have their shoes made by Nike, you can take a tour of their locker room. There's so many different things you can do online that these athletes can do. I mean, you can have your shoe size like perfectly fitted to your foot.
Right.
That they do there.
Yeah.
So it's these specific things that make it really great.
Yeah.
And those are the things that they took advantage of when you weren't able to go and recruit at home, and just being able to capitalize on Saban being there and like having, okay, well, I'm going to hear from Coach Saban. That just adds that much more to it. And then you look at the breakdown by state. I mean, those are the key states in college football that you need to recruit in, and just the name Alabama goes so much further in a year like this year where you can't maybe have that one visit that would change recruits' mind by personally meeting you.
Exactly, and it's a dominating class, number one, as far as the players are concerned. Very impressive as far as the distance traveled, where some of these guys are going from their homes to Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Head coach Nick Saban talked about the fact that it is a team effort whenever it comes to recruiting from both the athletic side and the academic side to land the number one class.
It's accumulation of a lot of hard work by a lot of people in a very different circumstance, but I think what everybody did is they adapted extremely well to the circumstance that we were in. We turned in what would have been official visits and camps and all those things into virtual reality, so to speak, in terms of how we managed, how we developed relationships, the time we spent, with the players that we recruited and the relationships that we were able to develop. It's accumulation of a lot of hard work by a lot of people in a very different circumstance, but I think what everybody did is they adapted.
Mark, you mentioned it earlier that Alabama has the number one recruiting class in the history of college football. That is according to 247sports.com. You see the other teams that are on there, and this is basically based on a composite ranking. And I won't get into the weeds of how 24/7 Sports does it because everybody does it differently. Rivals does it a little bit differently than ESPN, than 24/7. But 24/7 composite essentially is one of the more revered ones, and Alabama signing the best class in the history of their composite rankings, beating the 2010 Florida class and also the Alabama classes. You see them listed there, the reason why they've had so much success. 2017, 2014, 2013, and then the class a couple of years ago, all ranking in the top 10 of their composite rankings all time. And then, of course, Ohio State also in the exact same class as them as well. I do find it interesting, and I do find this whole the whole composite ranking interesting for a myriad of reasons. But obviously, number one, it is a pretty good. It's not the end all be all, but it's a pretty good indicator of who we will see in the championship games and who we will see going into the pros in a few years from now.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I did over the summer is I was able to talk to some of these guys who make these magazines and what the difference is between a 4- and 5-star athlete. There really isn't that much of a difference from book to book. It basically is, if you see a guy and you think he can do these other things, there's very little difference that separates at this level. But the thing is here is Alabama, a 95 average score rating, the 7th time they had the top recruiting class under Nick Saban. They are second to none in being able to get a guy that they might be on the fence. You mentioned Alabama, the chance to win a national championship, the chance to play in the SEC, to dominate like the SEC West has. The difference between the West and the East is the ability to not only win the division and then win the SEC championship, but go on and play in a college football playoff and then win that as well. You look at LSU, look at Alabama, Auburn. A lot of teams get a chance to play in the college football playoff, and that's what ultimately is the decision when you have, let me see, LSU, Alabama. That's why these guys choose Alabama.
Exactly. And for you, maybe Auburn fans, maybe LSU fans, maybe Georgia fans that don't like Alabama, there is one caveat that might not make you as sad to see this graphic. The one thing is that the graphics aren't always, or the numbers in the composite aren't always the best measuring stick. Take the team that Alabama just beat, the 2010 Florida Gators. That team, for the next 4 years, had a combined record of 30-20. Now, of course, there was a head coaching change. Urban Meyer started the recruiting process of all these guys, and then Will Muschamp ended it. However,
no SEC titles.
It's no SEC title, no national championship.
Titles.
So it's not a guarantee that the best class ever will be the best class on the field ever.
Slight consolation.
Exactly. But it's also different in the sense that Urban Meyer left the program, and Will Muschamp got on. Nick Saban still holding fort over in Tuscaloosa in 2020. Well, meanwhile, coming up here on Overtime, we will talk the Auburn Tigers. Brian Harsin with his first recruiting class, in really more than a half year being hired in December. We'll break down Auburn's class coming up next here on Overtime. Welcome back to Overtime here on WOTM. We took a look at Alabama's class earlier. Very impressive by any measure, by any standard. However, Auburn's class, they had to do some work here over the last couple of months. Of course, their new head coach, Brian Harsin, ended up getting the job on Christmas Eve. That was after the first signing day. A lot of those guys were Gus Malzahn guys, and so then he was introduced that day, I should say. And so they've had to do a little bit of work in the last month and a half or so, but Auburn comes in with a top 30 class. They end up signing 6 guys today. Take a look at these 6 guys that they did sign today. They signed Caden Bridges, also Tarvish Dawson, Juwan Gasson out of Montgomery, Alabama. They also signed Iku Lada, a defensive end out of Nashville, North Carolina, who's also transferring from Northwestern. Colby Smith, the offensive tackle out of Reidsville, North Carolina, and Joko Willis, who's coming from Independence Community College in Kansas. Also, he's from LaGrange, Georgia. As you take a look at Auburn's class and what they've had to piece over the last, I would say, last few months, or maybe not even last few months, maybe I say last 6 weeks, really, as far as being able to put together the majority of this class. Are you surprised and or convinced that he's done a pretty good job overall, knowing that he's been behind the 8 ball like probably no other coaches?
Yeah, well, I mean, him and Mike Bobo coming in, there's a lot of hype about what the offense can do eventually with those 2 offensive minds. But, I mean, they got put into a tough spot.
Yeah.
And especially when you're coming off a guy that was fired like Malzahn, who really did okay, especially in beating Alabama. You figure, okay, well, what's the next step we can take? And they were just so far behind the 8 ball, it's kind of unfair to expect them to go out and get a dynamic recruiting class so late in the game. So how they do in the next couple of years, can they recruit with Alabama? That's a really unfair thing to ask, just like it is any other team in the SEC, never mind a team in the same state. So to be held to the same standard as Alabama right now is very hard, but Auburn usually does it well.
Right.
And it's not like they get embarrassed. You know, if they do one year, they come back the next year and they either win or play very well. So they've done all right. And, you know, this is just kind of an extension. They get another guy in, see if he can do things a little better. But it'll be hard to get the results that Malzahn did, I thought did pretty well.
Exactly. I think the same thing. And I think also Auburn is one of those unique places that it kind of recruits itself. You go to a night game at Jordan-Hare Stadium, whoever it is, whether it's the LSU game, whether it's the Iron Bowl, whether it's the Georgia game, all these games, I think, once the kids get to campus, they understand it's the facilities are first class, and they're actually even renovating a multi-million-dollar renovation on those facilities. But secondly, the game day atmosphere in a lot of places, a lot of other fans around the SEC also call Auburn one of the top 3 places as far as overall game day experience. So I think Auburn's behind the 8 ball in 2 different spots. They couldn't get their players on campus in the same way that they normally would. But then also, on top of that, they are going in with a new coach that doesn't have ties to the Southeast. Now, he does have ties out west that I think will work in the long run, but those ties not in the Southeast, I do think put them behind the 8 ball. And obviously, They'll have some work to do, but I think they did get a pretty good step ahead in year one, so to speak.
Bobo
first recruiting class.
Bobo helps out a little bit too, because he does have ties with it. So.
Right. Auburn head coach Brian Harsin today talked about his class and the fit for a lot of his guys going into this season.
In our process, some things that were important to us. Fit, number one. All right, talking to these guys and their families and with our coaches, fit was a major factor. When we sat down and decided, all right, what is it that we're looking for in this next group of signees that we're going to bring in? Well, fit. And the culture, that's all part of it. You know, do these guys love football? High character guys, competitive guys, guys that want to come in here and work hard, guys that are winners. And so during the process here, we had those conversations to answer those questions and to figure those things out, and all these guys fit the bill.
All right, so Mark, let's take a look at the national team rankings. They'll vary a little bit depending on which recruiting site you're looking at, but this recruiting site will be 24/7 Sports, their composite rankings. Alabama's number one with 27 signees, followed by Ohio State, Georgia, LSU, Clemson, a smaller class with those 19 signees, Oregon, Texas A&M, USC, Notre Dame, and Michigan. I'll tell you, the ones that kind of stood out for me, number 6 Oregon, number 10 Michigan, and Notre Dame replacing a lot of players, just kind of like Alabama, replacing a lot of guys. They're signing another big class of 27. What stands out to you here in the top 10?
Well, you have four teams in the SEC. You got only 2 teams from the Big Ten, and you have 2 teams from the Pac-12, which really you wouldn't think with the way they've slipped the last couple of years. Really,
right.
when you talk major college football, the Pac-12 is kind of taking a back seat to everybody. Definitely the SEC, definitely the Big Ten, and even the Big 12, who's put teams in a college football playoff. The Pac-12 hasn't done that the last 3 or 4 years. And even the ACC, you have Clemson is always going to be up there. But where's that second team from the ACC?
Right.
Hasn't gotten there yet.
Right.
And that's really what they're waiting for, so the ACC can take that next step. Exactly.
And I think it's really interesting as just overall, when you take a look at what the conferences are able to do, and you take a look at the mere fact that there's an ACC team in there in Clemson, a quasi-ACC team in there in Notre Dame, but it's also Alabama and Georgia and LSU, still the cream of the crop. The SEC is still holding the top spots. Ohio State as well. Texas A&M also. I think Jimbo Fisher, I think this could be a one of those years where Jimbo Fisher can kind of take that next step. He loses a lot of guys from this year. Argument for the playoffs last year. Can he keep that momentum going? A great recruiting class in the top 10 here today. Meanwhile, let's jump specifically into the SEC. For Alabama, obviously number 1 overall, but then you got Georgia, LSU, Texas A&M, all we just saw on the graphic before, the top 10 teams in the country. This is how the rest of the SEC shakes out. The parentheses numbers are where they rank overall in the nation. So you have Florida just outside the top 10 at number 13, followed by Tennessee and Ole Miss. Then you see 8 through 14 here. Anything stick out to you? Auburn was close to the 40s, and they bumped it to number 30. Anything stick out to you? Obviously, the new coaches, Auburn and South Carolina, kind of working behind the 8 ball. But for everybody else, you would maybe see this kind of mirroring what you would see with the SEC standings.
Well, Tennessee at 6. I mean, was that because maybe the violations that got him in trouble? I don't know. But that was pretty good for Tennessee. On an ordinary year, 6 for Tennessee in the SEC is kind of where you can expect to be right now. Eventually, you would want to see them get better than Florida and Georgia. I don't know if you could do that in the SEC East. South Carolina, with Beamer coming in, if they ever want to get back to where they were under Lou Holtz and under the old ball coach, then they need to do better than what they're doing. I think fans expect them to do. I mean, you can't be below Vanderbilt. It's probably like that's the Mendoza line in baseball. The Mendoza line is 200. If you're below Vanderbilt in recruiting, that's not very good. So they got to get back up there. Kentucky is a team. Again, you don't know how much these teams expect to contribute in their division. If they're not recruiting at the level they're supposed to be, how can you expect them to be able to compete with Georgia and Florida in the East?
Right, and South Carolina's success in the SEC East going to SEC championship games was not that long ago. And I think
they only went to 1.
Right, and I think that just competing in the East is big for them. But we see those teams in the bottom. Auburn, Vanderbilt, South Carolina, all teams with new coaches. Meanwhile,
you're right.
Teams with a guy that's going into basically his first year, quote unquote. Guys like Michael Leach at Mississippi State, guys like Coach Wilson, or the new coach over at Arkansas, Sam Wilson over at Arkansas, guys like Lane Kiffin. all came in last year and then trying to make a name for themselves. You see the establishment up top, but I think there's a lot of interesting storylines in the middle and the bottom of the league.
Those coaches did pretty good. Kiffin, the guy at Arkansas, did absolutely pretty good. Same thing with Mike Leach at Mississippi State, especially after the way they ended the year. I think he did pretty good.
No doubt. All right, coming up next here on Overtime, we will talk Super Bowl 55. We'll have Mark in. We'll talk some game previews, have some keys to the game, lots of different interesting elements as we break it all down next here on Overtime. Welcome back to Overtime here on WOTM. Now, Mark, let's turn our attention to Super Bowl 55. Obviously, a really, really different week overall with the coronavirus and the Chiefs staying in Missouri and the Bucs being able to luckily sleep in their own beds throughout the course of this week. However, both teams now still trying to get themselves as prepared as they can for each offense and each defense. As we now go to our in-depth preview, we'll start with the Kansas City Chiefs. They're obviously led by a dynamic offense and a really dynamic quarterback in Patrick Mahomes. Travis Kelce, the best tight end in football. They do have some interesting storylines going into this matchup, though, with some injuries. What are some of your things that you're looking for on Sunday with Kansas City? Not necessarily just the offense, but the team in general.
Well, I think one of the things when you look at injuries, Eric Fisher on the offensive line, he's not going to play.
That's right.
So that means Mike Remmers, you could have to move over to left tackle. Now, Mike Remmers, he's, I believe, his 9th team in 11 years. One of those teams he was on was Carolina in 2015, Super Bowl 50. And if you remember how Von Miller single-handedly ate him up in that game, wound up winning their Super Bowl MVP, he's going to have to deal with Shaq Barrett.
Right.
Now, Shaq Barrett's a guy last year led the NFL, 19.5 sacks. He had 3 sacks on Sunday against the Packers. He's had 8 sacks over his last 5 games. He's a guy that has come on a lot toward the end of the season. The Buccaneers overall 23 sacks in their last 8 games. Pierre-Paul had 2 sacks against Green Bay. So they're getting to the quarterback a lot better than they were. And also, if you look at Barrett, he's generated multiple pressures in 17 consecutive games since week 2. That's the longest active streak in the NFL by a significant margin.
No doubt. And with this defense, it's obviously led by Steve Spagnuolo, who knows Tom Brady well. He was the defense coordinator for the Giants when those Giants knocked off the Patriots a couple of times, one of the times being the year that the Patriots went to the Super Bowl with an undefeated record. What are some of the things that you're expecting from this defense? It's an improved defense, but it's had some holes over the course of the last, I would say, 6 to 8 weeks. I would say it's had a bit of some holes. What are some of the things you're looking for with this Chiefs defense?
Well, look, the key to get Brady is you've got to pressure him up the middle.
Right.
That's what the Giants were able to do with Justin Tuck and so on. And that's really why the Giants were able to beat them in that Super Bowl. I mean, not only that, but the Giants held them to 14 points, which was amazing for that year when the Patriots were putting up 40 points a game. So if you're able to pressure Brady from the inside, that's one way to do it. If you're able to crowd his wide receivers, that's another thing. But Mike Evans also, you noticed that in the championship game, there was a little bit of maybe confusion between Evans and Brady, led to a couple turnovers in the second half.
Right.
Even though Evans is his leading receiver, a guy who's 13 touchdowns during the year, if that happens during the Super Bowl, that's not going to be good.
Exactly. Also, with Reed and Mahomes, this is now a combination that at 2 years in or 3 years in, and you have a quarterback that's 25, you have a coach that is in a position where he can do some things with his offense, be creative with his offense for a very, very, very long time. Do you see Reed and Mahomes potentially being what we saw with Brady and Belichick, a duo that created a dynasty that was in multiple Super Bowls and had the success that Brady and Belichick had?
If he can stay healthy. I mean, you look at Mahomes, he has abilities that nobody really has. And some quarterbacks are starting to get them, but he's just a freak offensively. He can do a number of things, throwing the ball.
Right.
He can run the ball. And he doesn't really seem to get that hit that's going to really do him damage. He seems to avoid the hard hits that might knock him out of a game. He doesn't really get sacked much, or if he does get under pressure, he's able to slide his way away from it, so you don't really get a good hit on him. So that's really the main thing. If he can stay healthy, this is a guy that can do a number of things really well. You look at his ability to avoid mistakes. That's another thing which you have to be able to do in today's game. He understands really well what Andy Reid wants him to do, almost as well as what Brady did with Belichick, which was basically the main reason why the Patriots became so good so quickly.
Right.
You know, if you look at that first year that Brady was there, they got off to an 0-2 start. One of the games they lost was to the Bengals in week 1, so they weren't going anywhere without Brady. All of a sudden he comes in and they get to the Super Bowl and win the Super Bowl and beat one of the best teams of that era, the Los Angeles Rams, with Kurt Warner.
Exactly. The biggest underdog at the time in Super Bowl history. The Chiefs right now a 3-point favorite in the game there. Meanwhile, Patrick Mahomes is one of the guys that is the #1 star of the game, and he's the star of the week this week as far as all the talk all over social media and on television, radio, everywhere else. But he says he's not paying attention to any of that.
If I'm not studying different film things or studying the playbook and stuff that we're trying to execute, I'm usually watching anything else other than the media coverage of the Super Bowl and myself. It's more just watching whatever else is on TV. Basketball, Texas Tech basketball, about to be ranked back in the top 10.
So now let's turn our attention to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Obviously went on the road 3 times, got 3 big wins. Brady played up and down and played not so great at Lambeau Field, but played excellent in Washington. Played great in New Orleans as well. Played decent in New Orleans, I should say. So now for Brady and the Bucs, what are some of the keys to their success in this one? Defense has been great overall the last 2 or 3 games. The offense has done what they needed to do. What are some of your keys for the Bucs?
Well, you look at some of the teams that are able to win 3 road games and go on to win in a Super Bowl. Okay, the last team to do it. The Steelers did it in 2006. The Giants did it in 2007. And the Oakland Raiders did it in 1980. They were the very first team to do it. The thing in 2006 with the Steelers is after beating the Broncos in the championship game, the Seahawks played a very sloppy Super Bowl.
Right.
And they were able to capitalize that and win. You saw how the Giants were able to throw the Patriots off a little bit by throwing different things at them and getting out of their game plan. And same thing in 1980 with the Raiders beating the Philadelphia Eagles, who were coached by Dick Vermeil at that time. They won 27-10. So they were able to cause the other team to do things they normally didn't do. And that was because they didn't really have those weeks off. They weren't able to rest their players. They were able to stay in that momentum. And that's a big key. But also back then, there wasn't the 2 weeks between the Super Bowl back then. But that enables Brady, a guy who's been here before. He knows how to win. He's seen just about everything you could possibly see. I don't think there's a defense you could throw at him that he doesn't like yawn at and say, okay, well, that's this, and I know how to arrange to that. Same thing with the receivers. You saw as the season get on, these guys are starting to understand them, Godwin especially, understand them a little bit better to where they don't run the wrong route anymore. They're not in the wrong place anymore like they were before. You saw many problems he had with Arians early on in the season. That's because of miscommunication after playing with Belichick for 400 years.
Exactly.
So, they're getting stronger and stronger, and definitely as the playoffs have moved on, starting with the Saints, so they looked awful during the regular season. They've been able to put together drives longer, been able to score a little bit better, and their defense has also performed better. If you look at the fact that they've held the last 3 quarterbacks to under 65%, 62% overall, that's a big number today in the NFL if you're able to hold the quarterback to that low of a completion percentage.
Yeah, that defense has been fantastic. Also creating turnovers as well.
Exactly.
Brady has improved this offense for sure. His numbers are off the charts, 40 touchdowns for the 43-year-old. Head coach Bruce Arians and Tom Brady talked about that mesh point of the offense and being able to improve in a brand new offense and in a brand new system.
Oh, he was all in as far as learning this system, and but there's not much to tweak, man. He knows how to take care of himself, and he's a great player. His preparation reminds me so much of Peyton Manning. Those 2 guys just set the bar as far as preparation for the guys that I have coached.
I think every year just try to improve my game a little bit, and gonna have to keep improving it. And as long as I'm playing, I want to improve and get better. And I think next year is going to be a lot better than this year. I feel like I'll be in a much better place mentally. I'm going to train a lot better this year. Physically, next year I'll be in a better place. So I know as soon as this game ends, we're on the next season.
Well, coming up next here on Overtime, we'll check in with our buddies over in New York. If you weren't with us last week, we had 2 of our friends that Mark knows really well. They joined us on the show last week. They had some great insights from last week, and they'll have some great insights on the Super Bowl. We'll have that coming up next. Last week here on Overtime, we were joined by some guys that Mark knows over in the New York era from worldwideradio.com and worldwidesportsradio.com, I should say. tell us about your buddies for those that were there last week and kind of the insights that they bring and some of the things that they do on their radio shows.
Errol and Speedy are on Mondays from 6 to 8 on Down to the Wire. And they have a number of guests. What they do really well is they interview a lot of these recruits that you saw on the board today. They did an excellent job of getting guests during the pandemic that wanted to talk about where they were being recruited, and it had a number of interesting interviews. But they also, look, New York sports are a little bit different. Down here it's more college-oriented. Up in New York it's more pro-oriented, but the one thing we have in common is the love for our sports teams.
Right.
And the ability to break the things down and to look and to analyze almost every little aspect of the game. When you talk Alabama football with people down here, man, they know every little thing that's going to happen from start to finish.
Right.
From the coin toss all the way through the final snap. And same thing with these guys in New York. They're able to analyze things on a pro level a little bit different than on a college level, but their love for sports and their enthusiasm is something that there's common ground on.
Exactly. Errol and Speedy were on a Zoom call with us, and we talked everything about Super Bowl 55, also some game predictions. They obviously had a great show. You can catch them at worldwidesportsradio.com. Here's their take on Super Bowl 55.
I think Bruce Arians is one of the ultimate offensive minds we've ever seen in professional football. Same thing with Andy Reid. That's why you have the battle of ultimate offensive minds in the Super Bowl. You have Bruce Arians and you have Andy Reid. Two very smart, offensive-minded guys that can find a way to win and find a scheme up how you can beat defenses. I can't bet against Tom Brady, especially with Fisher tearing his Achilles, losing their star offensive player. But I love Andy Reid. I've always loved Andy Reid. Besides the Jets, my second favorite team, I'm a Donovan McNabb fan. I know people think I'm crazy. I was an Eagles fan. I love Andy Reid. Think he's one of the greatest offensive minds of all time. He won the Super Bowl last year. Why not see Andy Reid do it back-to-back times? The last team to ever do that was the Bill Belichick Patriots. So I'm going to take the Kansas City Chiefs because I think Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce and some of the great offensive minds and great offensive power that they have. And hopefully, and I can't stand Steve Spagnuolo. I can't stand him. He's a terrible defensive coordinator, a.k.a. a la the New York Giants. I think that they're going to be able to hold up. I think they're going to be able to hold up. I got Kansas City winning a very close game, 21-17.
What you got?
All right. Two quick things before that. One, Steve Spagnuolo is very good as a defensive coordinator. Don't listen to Errol. And two, all you Alabama basketball fans, the team is legit. And I'm saying that absolutely from Bama. They are legit. They're a really good team. Watch out for them. I have Tampa in it. The one thing I worry about the Chiefs is two things, one of which is their matchup against the tight ends concerns me. You got Gronk, who torched the Chiefs many times with the Patriots in the past. Now, obviously, Gronk is different now, but still, it's a matchup to expose. And Cameron Brate, who's a good tight end, he'd start on probably 20 other teams right now. He's just stuck behind Gronk right now. That's a tough matchup for Kansas City. The other thing that scares me, too, and I say this about sports all the time, a team, how much can you actually ride a streak? The Chiefs haven't lost a game legitimately since week 5 when they lost to the Raiders. That scares me, too, that they're kind of due for that. And I think Tampa, there's something special with this home stadium type thing. They beat the Saints the way they did, destroy the Saints the way they did. And then going to Lambeau, which a lot of people didn't give them a chance at Lambeau. They won that game too, and they dominated most of that game as well. So I have Tampa. I'm going to say 26-20.
Interesting dynamic. So we'll have some bragging rights on the line there between Errol and Speedy, and one going Chiefs, one going Bucks, and we'll see who wins out there. And many, many thanks to both of those guys. WorldwideSportsRadio.com. You can also catch them on their YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, and other platforms. Do some great stuff there.
You gotta love the passion.
Oh, for sure.
Just screaming at it.
And
Steve Spagnuolo stinks.
and you can tell off the jump, and we'll try to have them on a lot more as we talk about other sports outside of the region, especially as we get to the sports in the New York area. Before we go, I wanted to hit some Super Bowl props. Obviously, with the Super Bowl, we have different props that are all across the board, and you have everything from the coin toss to passing yards for Brady, Mahomes. Do any of these stick out to you? I know we saw some on the earlier graphic. Do any of these stick out to you as far as ones that you might think that you could take Vegas on?
I wouldn't. I wouldn't take Vegas on because I'm not very good at it. I don't have very much luck. But you notice that this is like a national holiday for everybody. Everybody that whether they like football or not, usually is in some sort of betting thing, whether it's they'll take a cube for if the score is this, if it ends with a 3 or a 4 at the end of the first quarter.
Right.
Every Super Bowl party you go to, you have people that have no idea what football is, have no idea, never watched a football game before, who are like, well, what's the score at the end of the first quarter? Is there a 4 or a 3?
Right.
So those are the little things that I think are interesting to watch people who normally have no interest in it. The other thing is just how in-depth these bets get. Will there be a safety?
Right.
There have only been 5 safeties in Super Bowl history. Plus 700 for yes, negative 1429 for no. It means you have to bet $100 to win what, $1,400?
Right.
So it's or $1,400 to win what. Reverse. I don't understand it.
Put $1,400 down to win $100.
To win 100. There you go. Okay.
Right.
So just those things are so interesting to look at. Both teams score over 24 points a game. Yes, plus 100. No, negative 130. So if you want to bet on anything, you can in this game. I think that's what people like about it so much is gives them reason to pay attention to every little thing that happens.
Exactly, and you have that last one there with Mike Evans, 100 plus receiving yards, and the Bucks win. $100 wins you $390, and I think it'll be a fun night of gambling, I'm sure, for a lot of people.
And I do have one.
Everybody is that loves the entertainment purposes of the sports game. Coming up next here on Overtime, we'll shift our attention to basketball. Auburn played a game last night, slipped in the SEC standings. We'll talk about that next. Welcome back to Overtime. Let's shift our attention to basketball because we have a really interesting thing brewing in the SEC. Obviously, Alabama's still undefeated heading into tonight's game. They have a monster game tonight and a nice little 3-game stretch. Meanwhile, the Auburn Tigers, they beat Georgia by a lot.
Yeah.
And then they had them at home last night, suffered a loss there, falling 91-86, shooting 48% in the game, 8 of 27 from beyond the arc. If you just look at just the stats, they really didn't play that poorly. Georgia played really well. They are now 4-6 in league play. Is this cause for concern for the Auburn football team or the Auburn basketball team?
Well, a little bit. I mean, one thing Auburn was able to do was get to the foul line when they win, and they haven't been able to do that the last couple of games. The last 2 games against Baylor and against Georgia, 14 from 52 from 3-point range. It's not going to get it done.
Right, exactly. And obviously, coming up next, Ole Miss at Vanderbilt, at Kentucky. Do you see Auburn making a run here in these last, I'd say, 8, 6, 7 games where they can put themselves in contention where they are playing great basketball in the month of March and then try to get themselves into the big games?
Well, I thought when Cooper came in, he gave him a little bit of an advantage, but losing these last 2 games, look, losing to Baylor is understandable, losing to Georgia isn't. So, and there are going to be a lot of teams in the SEC that are going to be in that position, LSU, Tennessee, that are going to need to win games toward the end of the season, especially in the SEC tournament. So if they're able to go on a little run, it has to extend into the NCAA tournament because they're 4-6 right now, unless they win, 80%, 90% of the remaining games, including getting to at least the semifinals of the SEC tournament. I don't think they're going to have much of a shot.
Exactly. They're still a young ball club, so we'll see what they do. Head coach Bruce Pearl and the Tigers will face Ole Miss coming up this weekend. Well, coming up next here on Overtime, we'll close up our program with some Super Bowl trivia with Mark. We'll talk about that next. Welcome back to Overtime here on WOTM. We'll close it out with something fun here. We'll talk to Mark about Super Bowl trivia, and what we've done here is I've gathered some questions. We've put them together this afternoon and hit them from Mark, and now we will test his knowledge here of some of the things Super Bowl related. We've had some great conversations off air. See if he can answer these questions now that he'll see them for the first time, just like you.
Hiding the gifts under the Christmas tree.
Exactly. All right, so Mark, we have 10 questions lined up. Number 1, where was Super Bowl I played?
That was played at the LA Coliseum.
And that is absolutely correct. All right, number 2, what city has hosted the most Super Bowls, and a bonus point if you can get the number?
Miami, 8.
Miami, you're right. 11 is the number. Who has the most Super Bowl MVP trophies?
Well, I think that Tom Brady's got 4.
That's right. Tom Brady with 4, and also Terry Bradshaw has 2 of them. There's a lot of combined with 2. He has 4, has a chance to go for number 5.
And Montana's got 3.
What about the best overall record for the team that won the Super Bowl?
The best overall record, meaning the most wins, or?
Right, the most wins. And there, I will say there's a tie on this.
Well, Miami won 17. They went 17-0, and then the Bears, I believe, went 17-1.
That's right. And then what do you know the worst overall record?
The worst overall. Well, I know the Giants. The Giants are the only team that they were 9-7, and the 2011 Giants are the only team with a negative point differential to win the Super Bowl.
You're 5 for 5 overall so far. All right, number 6. Name the 4 quarterbacks to start the Super Bowl with multiple teams.
All right, Kurt Warner is
right.
1. Brady is 2.
Mm-hmm.
4 quarterbacks. Super Bowl team. Craig Morton.
That's
is
right.
3, and Eli Manning is 4.
His brother.
But Peyton Manning.
Yeah,
Peyton
I know what you meant.
Broncos and Colts.
I know what you meant there. So yeah, that's actually the 4.
Craig Morton.
Craig Morton. That was a nice pull there.
Yeah.
All right, who was
he
the
got killed
last
both times. Yeah.
non-quarterback to win Super Bowl MVP?
Last non-quarterback. Julian Edelman.
Super Bowl 53. I promise you, we didn't give him these beforehand. Highest scoring game in a Super Bowl
ever. It's a sickness. 41-33. That was Super Bowl 52.
49-26.
Oh, the Chargers.
That's right, the Chargers game.
49-26 probably than 41-33? I guess so.
Yeah, by a few points.
Yeah, by like 1 point. Oh,
right.
Boy. Oh, that's a killer.
Got him on 1. All right.
Oh, man. I can't show my face now.
Most rushing yards in a single Super Bowl.
Most rushing yards. That's Timmy Smith, 202. Timmy Smith, who had 600 yards overall in his career, at 202 in the Super Bowl, was running through wide holes.
That's insane. That's absolutely insane. All right, the last one. The 4 teams that have never appeared in a Super Bowl are.
I'm going to debate this because the Cleveland Browns came into the league as the Cleveland Browns in '97, but it became the Baltimore Ravens. So essentially, they are the Detroit Lions are 2, the Jacksonville Jaguars are 3, and number 4 is the Texans.
The Houston Texans. Tell you what.
It's a sickness. What do you want me to say? What do you want me to say? I tried all week to try and get on shows. Nobody wanted me.
That is pretty outstanding. That is pretty outstanding. Won't lie. So, anyways, all right, that was Super Bowl trivia. Now, do you know one other thing? Do you know the score of the game and who's going to win? It's prediction time.
Okay. Let's see. It's hard for me to go against Brady. Brady's in his 10th Super Bowl, for crying out loud. But the Chiefs are the team now that are going to, take the mantle from him, and Mahomes is the guy that's going to take it into the, further into this decade. So I think it's going to be a high-scoring game. I'm looking at like a 31-27 Chiefs win.
I like it. I'll go Buccaneers 38-35. It's a high-scoring game, and I think both those prop bets will be interesting between Mahomes and Brady. Those passing yards, I don't know if they. I think they'll both get there. I think it's a higher-scoring game.
Yeah, for Brady, it's over 300. For Mahomes, it's like over 330.
That's
I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep, 330.5. So we'll all watch the Super Bowl together, and then join you next week. We'll break it all down and talk everything in the world of sports. Thank you, Mark. Thank John yesterday. We'll see you next week here on Overtime.